Hi. Today is a long scripture, but a short recipe. So we're going to balance it out. How are you today on this beautiful 61-degree February the 1st? We're in February already. Can you believe that? Officially, how many days are in February? 28? 28 plus 14. 28 in this math science graduate. 28 plus 14. So the easy way to do that is say 28 plus 10. 28 plus 10 is 38. 38 plus 4 is 42 more days before the big 6-0. Can't believe I'm 60 years old. I could believe it when I got to the point where you start filling out applications and I got into the and above category. 55 and above, 50 and above, 45 and above. Depends on what you're filling out. So it's been a good life. Today, I was a little hesitant about what to put in the little box there. But what I wanted to say is that the cause of most sexual indiscretions is usually drunkenness. Being drunk, you know how you'll ask somebody a question, have you been drinking or are you out of your mind? The two of those can be used interchangeably because most times when people think we're out of our mind, it also has the appearance or the characteristic of somebody that's been drinking. Today is not necessarily about drunkenness, but it is what kind of led to John the Baptist being beheaded. You know, every time I get to this part of the Gospel of Mark or any of the Gospels, you just kind of pause for a moment. You know, I've been talking to people and having conversations about what we're going through in life. We're kind of like at the halfway stage where my friends have their kids coming out of college, going into college. We all have either experiencing bereavement of our parents or dealing with an elderly parent that, you know, after a while, even if they took care of themselves, like my dad, the old body just breaks down. And if we're lucky enough, you know, we eat all of these good things. And the caveat is that if we live for so long, he's 88, you know, eventually our body is just going to break down. And then it's just going to be interesting how you deal with that. But I am convinced that the more of this that we do, the better you'll be able to handle whatever that is if you are here for a very long time and the body begins to break down. But John the Baptist was beheaded. And every time you think about that, you kind of have to ask yourself, wow, because if you think about anybody next to Paul and Abraham, who were just like the most obedient, John the Baptist was right there. He knew exactly what he was here for. That's exactly what he lived for. And his reward, having his head chopped off and put onto a platter. But it's a good thing in essence, and we're going to talk about that today. So it's a little long, but it's all in the same thought, so it was no sense in breaking this up. So we're going from 6:12 all the way to 29. I took away the first 3 or 4 scriptures, the last time when we talked about how people viewed what they thought about Jesus. Some people were saying he's definitely a prophet. Others were saying it's Elijah come back. And then, of course, Herod had mentioned or assumed that it was John the Baptist. But now we're getting right down to the story about King Herod, how John's head got taken off, how he got into that situation. And we're going to talk about the circumstances of the situation, but more importantly, the characters in the drama. Because if you think there's not drama in the Bible, this story here is everything that the Hollywood, what are the Oscars? Are Oscars given for movies now? So this has the makings of a great one. But when Herod heard, he said, "This is John, whom I beheaded. He has been raised from the dead." For Herod himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for who he had married. Because John had said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man. We'll come back to that. And he protected him. And when he had heard him, he did many things, and he heard him gladly. So that's, and he heard him gladly. Then an opportune day came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a feast for his nobles, the high officers, and the chief men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter herself came in and danced and pleased Herod and those who sat with him, the king said to the girl, "Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you." He also swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom." So she went on and said to her mother, "What shall I ask?" And she said, "The head of John the Baptist." Immediately she came in with haste in the king's presence and said, I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And the king was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in person, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. And the girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples had heard of this, they came and took away the corpse and laid it in a tomb. Now, for those of you who just like hang out with me on here to look at the recipes or whatever, I know that's like a drop the mic for you. Is that in the Bible? Are you listening to this? Did you listen to what I just read? You know, so many times I just was kind of wanted to stop there and say, you know, but it's a long thing and we kind of want to get through the reading of it. But is that like insanity or what? This is some biblical stuff. And John the Baptist was the forerunner. He was called to be the forerunner for Jesus Christ. And he took his assignment. You know, some people are like, whoa, I'm going to be the forerunner for Jesus Christ. You know, all of a sudden there's the arrogance that comes along with having that position. There's the whatever. John the Baptist was like, hey, I'm not even worthy to loosen the straps on his sandal. John took his position, took his task, took the wheel, and stuck to it to the very end without any question, even when he was sitting in prison and he was saying, hearing all the things that Jesus was doing, because Jesus started his ministry immediately after John the Baptist was put into prison. And John sent for his disciples to ask Jesus, are you actually the one? Because he's probably thinking at that time, you know, every other time he was sure about everything, but at this time he's probably saying, why am I sitting in prison? You know, and Jesus never answered the question, but he sent back through the disciples, this is what I am doing. And so with that, and with John being who he was, that was the answer that he needed, and the contentment of just saying, okay, this is where I am. It has to be a part of the will of God. So be it. Now, how did John get into prison? So now here are the characters. So when you look at Jewish law, Leviticus, you can go back and scan through over in chapter 16. It starts talking about matrimony, marriages, and things. So everything that's here, why did John the Baptist go after? He didn't go after, but he publicly rebuked King Herod, saying, what you're doing is wrong. This marrying your brother's wife, what he did, and that's this whole. There's a lot of, when you're researching the Gospels and things in the Bible, through my research books, this is like 15, 20 chapters that they give you an explanation on how this family was. So it comes from the great king, Herod the Great, who was initially the king that did the massacre to have all of the babies murdered in trying to get to Jesus, all the male babies. So this whole family comes down from him, and Herod the Great was married 5 different times. His first wife had a child, he murdered the son. Then he married another woman. She had 2 sons. He eventually murdered those 2 sons. And then got married the 3rd time, had some sons, and he murdered those. There was a saying back at that time that it was, you would be luckier to be King Herod's pig than his son, because he just started becoming insane as he got older and just, wondering and suspicious about things. And, the men can always take over the hierarchy. So just got rid of him, just like he killed all the little baby boys. Now he started killing his own sons as they became a threat, a potential threat, that is. And so then you got to a point where he started marrying people that were in the bloodline. By the time you get to this woman, Herodias, she was actually King Herod's niece, as well as his ex-sister-in-law, because she was married to his brother. So how crazy is that? And so in my study research books, in 2 or 3 of them, they actually give you a diagram of how the different marriages and the entanglements of, sister marrying a brother and, just going on. And so even Herodias's daughter, Salome, who was the one that danced in front of the king, I think she is, because she wasn't the biological daughter of King Herod, but she ended up by default being like a great niece or something like that. And so this is what happens. And so why is that in the Bible? Why is this story in the Bible? Because when you look around you today, the same types of things are happening when people just decide they're going to marry their cousin because it's a distant cousin or whatever the case may be, or they're just doing these things. It may not be necessarily family entanglements, but matrimonial entanglements that include the neighbor or, some people that are in the church together. There's just a lot going on. And we just look at things and we don't feel like it's a problem. And what's interesting is when you run into some of these situations, the younger generations really are just like, it's not that serious, it's whatever. Whereas the older people get so angry when these type of marital entanglements happen that it causes them, these are like some of your old saints in the church. I mean, these are things that are like taboo to them, and they just won't even speak to the individual that they once called their sister or brother in Christ. And so it's just interesting, but it's something to think about. And you want to know why? It's because, just like I said in the beginning, this is made for Hollywood. It's because of what they're feeding us in the movies. When they start doing things, I'm a Hallmark movie kind of girl. And every now and then my sister would say, oh, you should see this movie on Netflix or something. And I'm watching stuff. And I'm just like, what? And this is today. This is the way stuff happens. And because we see that, because our children grow up watching these kind of movies, when they get into this stuff that 15, 20 years ago was called incest or insanity, drunkenness, lewd behavior, it becomes the norm. And people that are still living, that were living 15, 20 years ago when it wasn't the norm, have a problem adjusting to the fact that it is the norm. And that helps and goes back to the definition of who we are. When we start thinking about who we are as believers, as followers of Christ, as disciples, this is why we're studying the book of Mark, because Mark gets to how do you act as a disciple. It tells you this is the action gospel. And so it gets to a point where you have to understand that we are, one of the defining characteristics of us will eventually be that our behavior is countercultural. It is. And when it's not, we have to check ourselves, because everything that we're supposed to be doing is in direct opposition to worldly things. That's what the Bible says, that we're in this world, but we're not of this world. And that's a difficult thing to do. And so here we have this story where you've got this family that's just off the chain, and no wonder the behavior. When you look at what happened to get them to a point where they are family members, and then you start looking at their behavior, you can't be surprised. And that is what you have. When you have foolishness, foolishness leads to foolishness. So that's just a little history on the whole who we're dealing with. And so when you think about that, here's what's this is very interesting, because we read stories, for those of you who are familiar with the Bible, and we read stories like this, we think when the minute you talk about Judas, you just there's this thing that comes up inside of you. But how many of us are just like Judas? How many of us betray God when we don't have the countercultural behavior? Then we too are Judas. We're betraying God. He came to take us out of this type of bondage. And, each time that we don't stand up and speak for him and let people know who we are, and when we don't love our fellow man, and, we're Judas number 2. And so I want to say this because whenever I get to this passage, John the Baptist beheaded, there's a million portraits and things like that of this, and each one that you look at, you just like see his head with his eyes open on a platter, and what does it do to you? How does that make you feel? And so King Herod, think about, sometimes we know scripture so much that we know the story, we've heard it a million times, and we know the beginning, the end, and whatever. But when you start looking at things, I like to read the Bible and then go for a walk, the sunrise, and just where it's nice and quiet, and read the Bible and kind of put myself in that story line so that I could say, okay, I'm the king. What am I thinking? How am I going to respond to what's happening? I'm the king's wife. What am I thinking? How am I going to respond to what's happening? I'm the king's daughter. What am I thinking? How am I going to respond to what's happening? And all of a sudden, this story that you're so familiar with, the story that you know intimately, becomes an entirely different story. And if we're honest when we do that, we'll find ourselves in the pages of the wickedness, the lewd behavior, the betrayal, and everything. And we begin to have more empathy. We begin to do a little more self-reflection. We begin to become more conscious of our current behavior. It's really interesting when you start doing that. I don't know when I started doing that, but it makes it for interesting storytelling. And so when you put yourself, we'll get to John the Baptist last. So let's start with the king. And so the king was who had so his ruleship was in this kind of remote area. It wasn't like the king of everything, because he later went to the emperor to request to be king. And he was actually put in exile as a result, because the emperor was like, are you kidding? Are you kidding? You must not know what your life looks like and what your behavior and your reputation looks like. At least somebody in this whole thing had some sense. And he was like, absolutely not. Not only will you not be king, but I am going to put you in exile. And I'll talk about that at the end, because that's interesting in terms of what his wife decided to do as a result of that. And so you have this Herod, and he has the ability. He could have had John put to death the first time he rebuked him. But when he rebuked him, saying, what are you doing? You can't be married to this woman. Are you serious? Goes against anything that's moral and decent with the Jewish law. And he said it to him anyway, because John was about the truth. And it was something in that, this is something that we talk about this as we're talking about the characters here. And so when you are countercultural, you're speaking against people's behavior. When you're walking in the light of God, when you're working in the will of God, you are that light. The Bible says that we're supposed to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth. And so darkness doesn't like light. And so when you're coming and flashing a flashlight in people's eyes in the middle of a movie theater, you're going to get some looks, you're going to get some anger, you're going to get some other things. And this is what's happening. And so John comes and does this to King Herod. But even when you're doing that, when you're doing wrong, because we've all done wrong, we all do wrong, you know when you're wrong. You know when you're wrong. And when someone calls you on it, you're going to be angry with them. You're going to, go off on them or whatever. But in the depths of your soul, you know you're wrong. You know they're right. You know what they're saying is highly justifiable. And at the end of the day, those are the people that you respect more than your friends that are in your amen corner when they know as well as you know that you have no business doing what you're doing. You have more respect for the person that is going to call you out on your foolishness. You don't want to stop your foolishness. That's the reason that you're not going to respect them and what they're saying. But you do have that inner respect. And that is John the Baptist. He was a mixture, a good mixture of who you and I are. He had a mixture of goodness in him and he had a mixture of badness in him. We have the flesh and we have the spirit. And so at all times in life, they're constantly in battle. The flesh does not want us to be obedient to God. The spirit wants us always to be obedient to God. And so as long as we are here on earth, we are going to be in this body, which is flesh. And that is why we have to constantly keep our head in the Word of God, constantly be in communication through prayer with God, so that we can tell the devil to get behind us. And so not John the Baptist, but Herod, when this John the Baptist, strange man that lived in the wilderness, that only wore a belt and a furry thing and ate locusts and honey all the time, probably barefooted, probably very similar to what you and I would look at a caveman as, comes from nowhere and just rebukes the king like this. There has to be some saying, okay, you got a little bit of courage going on. Everybody likes a courageous person. And so John found himself, not only that, he knew, it says here in one of the verses, that he knew that John was a good, a just, and a holy man. For Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and a holy man. There's fear for people that are holy people. When people look and see that you are holy, why? Because if you are holy, you are of the one and only living God, which has the power to do anything, change your situation and change the situation of the person that's attacking you as well. And so he says he feared him, and therefore he protected him. Who is he protecting him from? Here's the little drama Hollywood thing. He's protecting the person that rebuked him and his wife. He's protecting him from his wife who wants him killed. So here's the story piece. When you're reading the Bible and you're putting yourself in the shoes of the other people, the characters and in the story, how do you think his wife feels? One, not only is he calling her out on her behavior, because if he's telling the king you have no business marrying your husband's wife, then you're basically telling her you have no business marrying your brother's brother, your husband's brother, And so he calls her on her behavior, but her husband is protecting him from her. Think about that. So these are the things that you have to think about to be able to get into the head and understand how a story gets to be like this. So when this is happening, every moment of this woman's life, she's trying to figure out how she can get this guy out of the picture. Because if her husband is protecting him from her, then her husband has to be having some constant communication, association with John the Baptist. He's had him put in a dungeon, but if he's going to protect him from her, he's got to go check up on him, make sure he's okay. He has to make sure there's a division between her and him, even though she wouldn't do anything like that because, you just can't go against the king as a wife, even though our girl did in the other story. But think about this. It says that he also loved hearing him. And when he heard him, he did many things and he heard him gladly. When is he hearing him? He's already rebuked him. After he rebuked him, he had him put into a dungeon. But it says he heard him on many things And when he heard him gladly. That means that instead of him spending time with his wife, he's going down to the dungeon to be entertained by the sayings of John the Baptist, who he's had put in prison, who he's protecting from his wife. He's trying to keep this man alive. Why is he trying to keep this man alive? Not just because he's a holy and a just man, but because he loves to be entertained by him. Okay, take off your shoes and get back into the shoes of Herodias. And how is she thinking when she's trying to be with her man and her man is sneaking down to the dungeon in the middle of the night to listen to what John the Baptist has to say? She wanted him dead for real, okay? And so she was looking for any opportunity that comes along. She's the devil. And as we're going about our life on a daily basis, the devil is constantly looking for a loophole. He's constantly looking for us to drop our guard so that he can come in and do what needs to be done. She was constantly looking for an opportunity to have John the Baptist killed. Having him put into a dungeon was not good enough. Making our lives miserable is not good enough for the devil. He is not going to be happy until he just takes us out, until there's death. The sin that causes death. Okay? And so here comes an opportunity. It's the king's birthday. The king's birthday, all of his friends are coming, the high captains, etc. At any birthday, at any feast, there's lots of drinking. And so she says, before anything happens, here's my opportunity because I know how this is going to end. When people get drunk, they lose their faculties, they lose every sense of wisdom, and that is the time that you can come in with the dagger. And that's exactly what she did. She looked for the opportunity. The devil knows that the minute we start getting into substance abuse, whether we're drinking too much, whether we're eating too much, whether we're smoking too much, whether we're being too slothful, it's got us in a point where we no longer are in a position to exercise wisdom. Therefore, it's our weak point. Therefore, it's an opportunity for him to come in and slay us. And so she didn't know how it was going to be done. She didn't know what was going to be done, but she knew she had an opportunity because it's the king's birthday. All his boys are coming, and it's going to be a feast. It's going to be days of drinking and drunkenness. And so she's smart enough. Put yourself in her shoes again. Here's the same woman that says, my husband would rather be in a dungeon listening to the man that rebuked us publicly, embarrassed us publicly, than be with me, be in bed with me, So I couldn't do anything to persuade him. She already knows this. So she gets her daughter who has to be younger, her daughter who has to be sexier and more sensual, to go in and really scoop. Because now you've got drunkenness and you've got sensuality. Smart woman. So she tells her daughter to go in and dance for the king. Dance for the king's guests. The other drunk captains and higher up people that can do anything they want to do with human beings, let alone female human beings at that time, when they get to that state, and no one can rebuke them or touch them. So she sends her daughter in to do what is typically done by a prostitute. Dancing in front of the king with little or no clothing on while they're drunk. And so I don't know if she was expecting this, but we put our feet in her shoes again and think about this. The king has decided that this girl has excited him so much in her dance that he's willing to give her anything that she asked for. He never told Herodias, his wife, that she could have up to half his kingdom. So what is she thinking at that time? Now she's really angry. Not only does she want John the Baptist killed, but she's probably thinking some other things too. Up to half the kingdom. And then you have this little girl. She has to be a little girl because once you get to be 16, 17, 18, you'd be like, okay, You done offered me whatever I want. Okay. But she's still at that tender age where she's not going to make a decision without going to her mother. Her mother pushed her out there. She says, oh, Mama, what should I ask for? And immediately, because that is how the devil works. The devil has his act together. He has his plan together. He's not like, oh, Dallas slipped a little bit here. What would be the best way to really get her? No, he already knows me in and out. He knows the word of God in and out. So she's ready. And just like her, John the Baptist's head, and it says here, immediately she went in and told the king, I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. Wasn't good enough to kill him, to execute him. They wanted to take his head off and bring it on a platter and do it immediately. Now let's put ourselves in the shoes of John the Baptist. Here you are, maybe waiting for your dinner, lunch, or whatever you were thinking, or whatever you were doing, or whatever you were anticipating, he couldn't have been thinking this. And then somebody comes, not knocking on the door, but probably jangling on the bar rails of the prison cell, and says, yo, come over here. And he's got a butcher knife or whatever, some hatchet, you know? Remember when they told Abraham to bring the son, and the son's like, okay, where's the ram? You know? Am I the sacrifice? So you got somebody at the jail cell door with a hatchet saying, John, come on. What is he thinking? What is he feeling? I'm going to get back to him. So go back to the king. And why does the king do this? And in your study and your research, it goes into some other things. It doesn't say much here. It just says, and the king was exceedingly, not just sorry, but exceedingly sorry. Just hurt him to his heart that what he is about to order is not what he wants. So what makes him do that? The same thing that makes us do what we have no business doing, and we know we have no business doing it. And so we can't look down on him because, again, this is the same man that's just like us. He's of a mixture of good and bad, a mixture of flesh and a willing to sin, and a mixture of the spirit, hoping that you won't sin, but having no control over whether or not you do sin, giving you that free will. And so he's exceedingly sorry. If he's so exceedingly sorry, if he's so sorry, then why just not call it off? Because that is what we do when we're drunk. That is what we do when we're out of our mind. That is what we do when we're not thinking clearly. That is what we do when we don't spend quiet time with God, when it seems like the wheels are falling off of things around us, just so that we can have a better perspective, so that we can not be anxious, instead be prayerful with our supplications. We ain't doing it. That's what happens. He acted impulsively. Can I have up to half of my kingdom? He had no business offering her that. He had no business telling her that anything that she wanted. But it was impulsive because he was drunk. And he wasn't exercising wisdom. Because you don't have the ability to exercise wisdom when you're drunk, because your faculties are not in place. You have no control of them. Not only that, it's that thing that we all deal with, where we're concerned about what other people are going to say about us. If we've even come to a point where we say, you know what, this was a bad decision. I changed my mind. How many people tell people in the excitement of how the engagement ring comes to you and, you know, just all that fluff. And you know this isn't the person that you want to marry, or you would have married him before now. And once you get off of the cloud of the roses and whatever else and the champagne that came along with the proposal, you start asking yourself, do I want to spend the rest of my life with this person? No. But we're afraid of what his mother would say, his parents would say, what your parents would say. Well, aren't you going to marry this person? He would make you very happy and like to offer you security. I've been there, done that, work at a t-shirt, okay? But you have to be able to say, I don't care what you think. I ain't marrying him. But he was afraid of what his friends would say. his fellow colleagues would say, because he had given the girl an oath. And when you stretch out and you say, I'll give you anything that you want, you know, that's just like putting the scepter out, and it's just like an oath. And, you know, you just can't really go back on that if you don't have the backbone and the courage. And he didn't have that. But he's just like some of us, where we're so concerned about what people would think if we're still driving our little hoopla because we're trying to save some money. You know, what would people think if we don't have our red bottom shoes on where everybody else has their red bottom shoes on, you know? And it's just killing us. It's killing us financially. It's killing us mentally because you're stressed, because you're living outside of your bounds. You're stressed because you don't even know what you're doing anymore. You don't even like what you're doing, but you're so into it because you're trying to hang out with the culture. So we see John the Baptist in all of us. We see Herodias in all of us. So she's thinking he's going to give her up to half of his kingdom sooner or later, as this whole entangled marital things that have happened historically in this family. She's probably going to be sat out with the cows, and the daughter is going to be sitting in her seat. So she probably had another plan in place. But it says he was exceedingly sorry, yet because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent an executioner and commanded his head to be brought. And he went and beheaded him in prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to her mother. What do you think her mother did with the platter? Rumor has it that she took it out and she buried it. And then later some of John's original disciples found out where it was buried, and they went and pulled it up, and there's a place that's called the head of John the Baptist. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's a prayer about John being beheaded. There are poems about it. There's a lot going on with John the Baptist if you ever want to research it, the beheading of John the Baptist. So we've talked about the king, we've talked about the wife, and later that year after all of this happened, when he did become exiled, the emperor gave Herodias the option of either going with him. She didn't necessarily say that's your option, but he told her that she did not have to go into exile with him, and she was free to leave him. And she decided that she was going to go wherever her husband was going. And that's what she did. So I don't know how we feel about that. Maybe she felt like that was the only way she was going to be able to keep him or anybody else as she began to get older if she was in exile, because they would be the only people there. I don't know. But I want to talk about John the Baptist just quickly here. So you have John the Baptist. Just before the beheading, just before all of this, think about John the Baptist. John the Baptist immediately after coming into what he was supposed to be doing as the forerunner, went straight for the wilderness. His parents were probably like, where's John? And the father's probably like, he out in the backfield somewhere. So as soon as John was old enough to be able to be on his own, he chose to live in the wilderness. He chose to wear mohair and a leather belt and I guess maybe sandals, or probably barefooted. Eat locusts and honey. You know, why does the Bible tell us about that? In the very first chapter of Mark, we talked about, that's how it started. This is the gospel, and it talks about the man, John the Baptist. And so it talks about his character. It talks about the clothes that he wore, the fact that he loved the wilderness, he lived in the wilderness, preached and taught in the wilderness, and he ate locusts and honey. So the Bible takes time to tell us this about him. And now, after he baptizes Jesus, and Jesus spends some time, 40 days fasting in the desert, as soon as he comes out of the desert, of his 40 days of fasting, now ready, now positioned, now poised to do his ministry work, John the Baptist is imprisoned at that same time. So imagine, I often think about this as I'm visiting my dad, and I'm dealing, when I had the sick and shut-in ministry, and I would often go to home and I learn about people's history and what type of lives they had. And, the thing is that hopefully you get to die in your own home. Hopefully you get to spend your last years independently living in your own home. Because if you've got to go to these not necessarily the assisted living, but the nursing homes or hospitals, nobody's going to be feeding me the type of food. That's what I used to always think. I am going to be I'm going to have a problem because I am not going to be able to get the food that I want. I'm not going to be able to get somebody to do my locks the way I want. It's just so much that so then what? Do you just, start eating meat, start eating what they feed you, start eating, enriched flour and bread and just all the stuff that just, helps us die is readily available. And so you look at that. I often think about our friend. Remember when I was on radio many, many, many years ago, Dr. Batman Gillich. We used to call him the water doctor or Dr. Batman. Some people called him. And he was famous for the books that he wrote on, how water heals the body. Oh, he's just such a wonderful, wonderful man. And when his wife told me that he had passed, I was like, all right, because I didn't find out until like 6 months afterwards. I was like, oh my God, what happened? And she told me he had pneumonia. And he had gone to the hospital. And I just said, oh my God, the thought of him dying in a hospital. I mean, this man was adamantly opposed to anything going. I always tell people, if my leg is hanging off, get me to the nearest hospital, let them stabilize me, and then I can come do my own stuff. But just the medical system was after him. And so that had a lot to do with it too. But yeah, and so you think about things like that. And so John the Baptist, who loved to listen to the birds 24/7, who loved to, his ceiling was the open sky and stars, and, trees were his friends and doors, and to be taken from that and put into not just a prison, but a dungeon. So a dungeon means just that down, down, down in the earth, usually concrete ceiling walls, and it's just some little hole where a little bit of the sunlight might squeeze through. And so this was the type of, not to mention the food thing, he's not getting no locusts and no honey in nobody's dungeon. They probably even made him put, what do you call prison clothes? I can't even think. Some clothes on. And he just, he's not used to any of that, none of that. And so, but he did what he was supposed to have done. Some people know what they have been sent for. Do you know? And he was the forerunner for Jesus Christ. And when asked his disciples, go ask, are you the one? And they came back and says, this is what he's doing. And he knew that was the one. So imagine that too, knowing that, you know what, I was created for something, and that something has been fulfilled, and I did my part. And so now, I don't get a new task. I don't get another will for life, But yet, I'm put into this environment that is totally countercultural to who I've been and what I've been as I've done the will of God and done it well. Imagine what he's thinking. The first day he got thrown into prison. John was out there minding his business. He was staying in his lane, telling people, repent, baptizing people. He wasn't in conflict with anybody. Like the rest of the disciples, they were thrown in and out of jail all the time. But John the Baptist was doing his thing, and then all of a sudden, bam, he's dropped into a place that is totally contradictory to anything that he's known, anything that he's loved, anything that he's wanted to do. And so, shortly after that, somebody's coming and taking your head off. And this is what I say about us a lot when it gets to the time where we have to make those decisions. Because you know what? Technology can keep you here, hanging on like a thread. In the Bible, they talk about King, I forget his name, that they propped up, when he was dead, And sometimes you're on these ventilators, you're on all this stuff, and where's the real life? It's not even a quality of life, but is it actually life? Do you know? So I'm thinking, when the man's standing at the jail cell with the hatchet, John the Baptist like, yo, this is it. This is it. And so when we get to those places in life too, we too want to get to a point where we know we've been walking with God. The same God that has allowed us to complete our tasks, to make a difference in others' lives, to bring others to the knowledge and understanding of him, is the same God that will guide us into the graveless, nightless, deathless city that is his home, which is also our home. Too many of us are afraid to die. And the Bible talks about to die is Christ. To live is gain, to die is Christ. As long as we're here, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're making a difference. Our behavior is pleasing to God. But when we leave, we don't die. We enter into the presence of Christ. And that's a much better place to be. And I believe that John the Baptist had a peace that surpassed the understanding of the situation that he was in. Because he lived for the truth. And when you live for the truth in such a courageous manner in which he did, you're willing to die for the truth. And that's a question some of us need to ask ourselves. What are we really living for? And what are we willing to die for? So, in the meantime, as long as we're here, we need to stay sober as possible. There's not a whole lot on the table because I know that right during this period, there are a whole lot of people that are fasting because they're involved with the church. And the church typically goes on a congregational fast at the beginning of the year, the middle of January, the end of January, somewhere in there. Some people do it for 14 days. Some people do it for 21 days. A lot of people are on this, I think it's January 21 through February. I think it's February the 11th. I'm like, okay, they're not going to the Super Bowl parties. I don't know how that's going to work out for a lot of people. I was talking to one of my friends who I know is doing that. Alfred Street Baptist, I know they're all doing that. That's their date line. And I know First Baptist at Glenarden is also in the midst of fasting. And so I was like, so what's the date? Are you guys going to be fasting on Super Bowl day? And she was like, well, people are always going to do what they want to do anyway. And it sounded a little bit like, I might have a little something, I think this week, coming into this week is their water week. So for those of you who are a part of the church, what you might want to do, which makes it easier when you're doing the water fast. I used to do a 31-day water fast from January to January 31st for years. And I started it with some of the bishops in South Africa because they had been doing it for years. And they told me about it. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And, by day number 2, you're like, oh, God, am I going to get through this? But then somewhere around day number 4 and 5, you start thinking, I should do this all the time. Really, by day number 7, you're like, oh, food is just so overrated. I think I'm only going to eat 1 day a week after I come off of this. And then you just start thinking all kinds of things, and you're just okay. You're okay with not eating. You're okay. You have to remind yourself, with me anyway, by day number 14, 15, to remind myself to drink water, And on day number 32, which would be the day after the 31 fast, you start eating a grape or two. You just can't stop yourself. It's just like all of a sudden, I don't know where my head was when I was saying I'm going to be doing water 6 days a week. But it just goes away. But when you're walking and you're praying, and that's the thing about fasting, you have to really kind of disconnect from social media. I mean, it's a time where it's not just a physical piece, but it's really the holistic. It's the spiritual, mental piece. And quieting your mind and reading books on health and the Bible, and just being totally engrossed in that and kind of removed from your friends and social life, and just spending a lot of time just being intimate with God. Sometimes me personally, when I go out walking in the morning, it's quiet, I'm listening to God and whatever, but it's not the same as just sitting in a chair or being on your knees and saying, okay, God, this is your time. Just me and you, and so you do more of that when you're fasting, and you find that just all positive things, negative things are just like boomeranging off of you. It's just a wonderful feeling. So but we probably don't get into fasting the way that we really should, where it's as beneficial as it could be. And I don't want to get into it right now. I'll get into it maybe after the 11th. But fasting can be detrimental, almost, when we don't do it correctly. So you have to really be careful with that. And there are ways to proper ways to fast, because you're taking your system through a lot. And so when people are like, oh, I'm going to fast tomorrow, and so today I want to have me some pizza, I want to do all this other stuff, but then they go into lightweight starvation, and then, next week we can come, they start going to the grocery store and filling the refrigerator with all these great things that they want to eat the day after their fast is over. That is going to kill you. There's a period where if you're going to fast for 5 days, there should be a 2.5 day pre-fast where you get to a point like the day before you actually start fasting, you should be eating mono fruit, and then soft mono fruit, so that would be grapes or some mango, and then you're eating it, in a certain way. You're chewing one grape 25 times before you swallow. It's a lot. The meat, the dairy, the bread, that has to be out of your diet 6-7 days before an actual fast. So technically, if you're doing a 10-day fast, there's a 5-day pre-fast, and there's a 5-day coming off the fast. So, you're talking 20 days before you get back to eating the types of foods that you were previously eating, But then some people it depends on the type of fast you're doing. If people are a lot of these fasts are people are doing, when people tell me about the Daniel fast, and I'm like, okay, what part of that is actually fasting? So you want to, I guess you can take all that into consideration. If you're just cutting carbs out of your diet, and it's not as, but when you're doing like a fast, that's going to detox the body, and it's the cleansing and the fruit thing and the mineral buildup thing that you can't be doing when you're doing even some of those other things, the vegetables that are cooked. It's not happening. So you just, it's a lot to that. But this is a great drink for people that are fasting. So when you are fasting, you should try and purge your system with as many fresh fruit and vegetable juices as possible, because you want to help the body alone cleanse and detox and rejuvenate as much as you can. So these are my favorite red globe grapes. The only grapes that I eat, because they're the only grapes that have seeds in them. That's another day, another time, but we do not do seedless, child of God, whose religion is predicated on the seed. No, we don't do seedless anything. So these are red globe grapes. I always get mine from the commissary. I know Shoppers Fruit Warehouse sells them. There are a lot of stores that just can't even find seeded grapes anymore. It's a shame. It's a shame. Some of the things that we do in this country. So you simply pull the grapes from the vine and rinse them off. Now, grapes are very sweet. So when you start talking about pesticides, you start talking about sprays, fruits that are sweet, they're going to be heavily sprayed because of that. And so what I typically do, because you're not going to find any, you might, it's 1 or 2 stores, 1 or 2 times of the year that might have organic grapes. So you take the grapes and you pull them off, and then you put them in a bowl like this. You fill the bowl with warm water, and then surprisingly, the only other ingredient we're using today is apple cider vinegar, but that's the same thing that you clean your grapes with. You take a tablespoon or 2 of apple cider vinegar, let it sit in the grapes with the water for about 2, 3, 5 minutes, and then rinse it off pretty good. And that's about as close as you're going to get. So then, once we have our clean grapes, you take a couple of handfuls. I just put 2-3 cups of distilled water in there. You're just going to kind of keep going through the iterations until you find what you want. You might want a thicker drink that has more grape pulp in it. You might want it to be thinner for yourself. So you'll experiment with that. But all we know is that even with grapes, you don't even need a lot of water to get started, because they have a lot of water in them. They're probably 45-50% water. So those are something that will turn on its own. Unlike the apples, you're going to have to put a little bit more water in there to make your apple juice. So we start with the water. This is distilled water. You put your grapes in and you simply blend it on high. Now, notice I said take the grapes off of the vines and rinse them, which means what? It means that we have the seeds in the juice as well as the skin. Now, let's talk a little bit about why this is such a super drink. So, when you open up a seeded grape, there's your seed, and if you look inside that little area that's very soft and mushy around the seeds, where the seeds are embedded, has a lot of pectin in it, Pectin, which you hear me talk about all the time, heavily or available or readily available in apples, which is really, really good for you. Whenever you look at a good colon cleanser, one of the first ingredients will be pectin. Okay, a colon cleanser. So if you've got red grapes that are embedded in natural pectin, apples that are predominantly natural pectin, those are the foods that apple a day keeps the doctor away. This is what, when I was in South Africa working with my friends, the bishops, we would put people that were HIV on a grape fast. So basically you would have about a pound of grapes. That's about a pound of grapes. And so you would have about a pound of grapes every hour of the waking day. So at the end of the day, you'd have like 8 pounds of grapes for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. Talk about flushing the system out. Talk about making the body feel pain-free, And so you do that, and you drink a lot of water in between. But that's a really, really good cleanse for people, and I often recommend it to my clients, especially in the summertime. So you put as many grapes in as you want. You blend it on high, and the magnesium. So often we talk about those 5 minerals that the body needs to be well, and calcium, potassium, sodium, magnesium, and silicon. Those are like the top 5. You have like 13, but those are like 22, the top 5. And so beneath the skin of the grape is a ton of magnesium. And when you take most fruits that have edible shells or skins, the majority of the nutrients lie just below the skin. That's definitely the case in watermelon, which is why when you're doing your watermelon juice, you always want to put a considerable amount of the pulp and some of the rind in the blender to take advantage of all of those extra nutrients. So you get a lot of magnesium, a lot of other good stuff from grapes, but predominantly the magnesium and the pectin are which makes them such effective cleansers. So that's what it's going to end up looking like. You see a lot of the skin. The grapes are the seeds are going to disintegrate after it's blended a couple of minutes. So you can continue doing this process. And then what you do is you take fresh apple cider vinegar and pour it in. So that may have been a 1/4 cup to 32 ounces or so. It depends on you. Some people might like it a little more tart, not so tart. That's going to be something you play with, engage on, experiment. So whenever I go to the commissary, they're like, oh, who's the grape lover? Because they usually get 5, 7, 8 bags of the grapes. And I'll take them and clean them. I'll put a lot into little sandwich bags and just have a bag in the morning after I finish working out, have another bag in the afternoon. So I get into that, zone sometimes where, okay, this is like a grape week where I'm doing an abundance of grapes. Try to do them on a weekly basis, but then there are days where I'm just like absorbed with grapes. Today was one of those days because I had gotten these. We were going to do a video last week. And so we have that, and then you just put it into a glass container and can refrigerate it. And so again, it's going to depend. So that's a little chunky, which is how you want it if you're going to be fasting. Because when you're fasting, I find that most people, the largest problem is they're saying that they, when they're juice fasting, it's like, I've got to be chewing on something. So this way, and even if you didn't have the bulk residue in here, if it was just all smooth, when you're fasting on juices, you want to take 16 ounces of juice and take 16 minutes to drink it. You don't want to just like gulp it down. You're going to take the juice, roll it on your tongue while you're holding it in your mouth. You know how you're holding some water in your mouth, like a cough drop or something? You just kind of want to roll it on your tongue, roll it under the tongue, kind of massage it in your mouth, and you can add more water to it. And then if you start drinking it, because you want to kind of put it in a refrigerator for a few minutes, but once you start drinking it, if it is too sweet, too bitter, has too much cider in it, you can dilute it with water, just throw it back in the blender, blend it some more with some more waters. If you want to have a sweeter taste to it, add more grapes to it. So we're going to put a little more vinegar in here. And apple cider vinegar, what is that? That's fermented apples. So that in and of itself has another dose of pectin in it and lots of minerals and vitamins. And so you're just putting yourself in a double whammy. And so this is just water. So I think we have enough water in there. So we're going to put it in another jar. And so you get, what, 64 ounces? That was less than 2 pounds of grapes. So imagine you have 6 or 8 bags, which will probably be about 12 pounds of grapes, which means you will have gallons of juice. And that way you could actually do just a grape juice fast. And then the good thing about when you decide to do a grape fast or an apple fast, you do the same thing with apple and a little bit of ginger and lemon. And so say if I decide I'm going to do a grape drink fast or a grape fast. So I have the bottled grapes with apple cider vinegar in it. And then I go and wash some more grapes. So I'm drinking grape juice. If I feel like I need to chew on something more than the little skin that's in there, then I can eat some grapes. So eating the same thing you do when you do the watermelon fast that I tell people is really want to flush your system out. Cut up a half a watermelon and put it in a blender with the rind and the pulp. Blend it up. You'll get yourself 5-6 containers of watermelon juice. And then take the other piece, half of the watermelon, and cut it into big chunks. So you're eating watermelon, you're drinking watermelon juice, you're eating watermelon, you're drinking watermelon juice, drinking watermelon juice, eating watermelon. And that's a few days of that. The body is just like, whoa, let's be kids again. And you just, feel like you're 12 years old and stuff. So you do the same thing with the grapes. Eat some grapes, drink some grape juice, an hour later or whatever. And then that way, and you'll know it because you're going to start feeling so much better so fast. And so that will help you stay motivated on that. And so when I said this tastes like wine, when you put a little bit of apple cider vinegar in blended grapes, that is what you have. That is actually grape juice is wine. That is the type of wine you have to believe that the disciples were indulging in on a regular basis. They would simply go out and squash the grapes with their feet and put a little vinegar in it and drink it. And so this is made today. If I put this in the back of the refrigerator and leave it there, the longer I leave it there, the more it's going to ferment. And what is wine? It's fermented grapes. And so sometimes I make a bottle and I'll put some in the refrigerators in the garage and I forget that they're out there. And you get it and it's just like really strong. And so some people like it like that. I don't particularly care for it. It's better for you the longer it ferments like that because the apple cider vinegar is a natural preservative, but the longer it ferments like that, the better it is for you. Just like kimchi and sauerkraut are really, really good for you. Same thing with the grapes. So let the wine that you drink be fresh, raw wine so that not only will it not deter from you having complete control over your faculties, you will have better faculties because it will clean all the crap out of your mind and your body to allow your body to be at its optimal. So I hope this has all been helpful. We missed last week. So hope you'll get a chance to listen to this in the next 7 days because I will be back on next Thursday to get us back on track. And then we'll resort back to every other week. Okay? Enjoy the rest of your evening.